I need to ask you about Prince Andrew, if you don't mind. I don't know if you've had any run-ins with Prince Andrew over the years or met Andrew, but Royal Lodge is a constant story at the moment. What's going to happen to Royal Lodge? So we understand that the King does want Andrew out of Royal Lodge, but the idea would be not to move any members of the royal family into it, because obviously it was the late Queen Mother's house as well.
Yes,
people have lived there for years,
so, yes.
but to return it to Crown Estates and maybe rent it out to some wealthy people or use it for another purpose. What do you think of that solution? And what do you think that the King should do with Prince Andrew and Royal Lodge?
Well, first of all, some of the houses at Kensington Palace have been rented out to people or given to sort of Chief of the General Staff and people like that. So there is a precedent for this sort of thing. Prince Andrew was getting into trouble if you say anything in his favour, poor chap. But I mean, he hasn't been convicted of anything. But I mean, he gave that ridiculous interview. He's very unpopular, and he does not do royal duties, and nor will he. So it seems to me that at some point he does need to move somewhere more practical. And I'm sorry that that the Queen died before she sort of sorted him out, which she could have done, because she could have bought him a house somewhere. I don't necessarily wish to say where it might be, where he would be content and safe and sort of out of the way, and this sort of issue wouldn't be coming up. I mean, Royal Lodge is huge and must be very expensive to run, and if he isn't getting the grants and things that he did before, it means that the King will be supporting him, and therefore probably in the fullness of time he needs to live somewhere smaller. But all he does now is ride in the park and play a bit of golf and things. And, well, I mean, he's it was born in 1960, so he's 64. So I suppose he's almost at a sort of retirement age, if you like, for most people, not usually for members of the royal family. But he's not going to come back. He's not going to do any more royal duties. And so I guess at some stage he will leave Royal Lodge, but it would be better if he could do it voluntarily, I would suggest. As for renting it out or using it another way, that's quite an interesting idea, because it is actually right in the middle of the home park, and it's right next to the little chapel where the Queen certainly used to go every Sunday when she was at Windsor. I'm not sure how practical it would be, but then Fort Belvedere, of course, was given to Galen Weston. He used it, and he did it up very stylishly. So maybe it's a form of bringing revenue to the Crown Estates, and the King's very keen on all that sort of thing, making things pay for themselves. So, yeah, it could be put to some use like that.
Well, we'll talk about that for weeks and months and years coming up. William and Catherine will not move in, by the way. That's been 100% ruled out. They don't want to live in Royal Lodge. They're quite happy at Adelaide Cottage.
Well, I've been to Adelaide Cottage under other, when somebody else was living there. It's wonderful. It's lovely. And perfect place for a young family. And it's also got a lot of land for which, as you see, Prince William can scoot all over on his little gadget.
Exactly.
Yes.
Right, we're running out of time, unfortunately. So to finish off, I'm having to give you the dreaded quickfire questions at the end. Okay. Do you mind? Are you prepared for these?
I am.
Right.
Let's see how
we can get on.
Yes.
Right. So there was video footage of the Duchess of Edinburgh at Sandringham.
Yes.
Taking part in a drinking game while she was carriage racing.
Right.
Who, in all the roles that you've met and all the experience that you've had and been everyone, who would win a drinking game?
Well, funny enough, considering how much wonderful wines and things that they're always offered, they drink very little, the royal family. So I would suggest that you should put Prince William up on this, because he is so tall that it will take a long time to pass through the system, and therefore he'll be able to cope better with whatever, assuming it's alcoholic that he's given. I don't know what he drinks, but I know that the Queen hardly ever drank any wine. Prince Philip didn't either, and Princess Anne drinks absolutely no alcohol of any kind. Won't even have it in the pudding. She wouldn't even have it in the trifle.
That's a good theory, but Mike Tyndall says his nickname is One Pint Willie.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So when I was in Scotland this week, the King and Queen were given a cake by a Great British Bake Off winner. I don't know if you've seen it. Which royal would win if they took part? If they were contestants on Great British Bake Off?
Well, I imagine, going to answer this rather boringly, it'd probably be one of the younger ones who are probably more sort of brought up to look after themselves than some of the older ones who've been catered for. So I guess maybe one of the younger royals, perhaps Zara Tindall, who knows, might be a good person for that. I'm sure they're all very practical. I'm sure they're very good. They're all very good at looking after themselves.
That's a good answer. I remember seeing some footage of George William
Yes,
and Catherine
yes.
kind of baking, weren't they?
With the
2
Queen
years
and
ago?
with Prince Charles. Yeah, they
Yeah.
did the generations, didn't they,
Yeah.
in Windsor Castle. So, well, maybe Prince George would be up to it. He's a great cricketer, Prince George, by the way.
Is that right?
Yeah, look out for him in cricket.
Okay, all right. I'll note that one down. So what do you think has been the biggest crisis in the royal family over the past 50 years?
Well, of course, 50 years doesn't take in the abdication. So obviously, I suppose the death of Diana, 1997, was a big crisis point. But at the risk of being controversial, will the arrival of Meghan Markle prove to be a bigger one in the long run? Who knows?
Well, I got in trouble before on this show with some viewers for suggesting that I thought that Harry's departure was the biggest crisis in the past 50 years. But I'm with you. I think that period of time between the Duchess of Sussex arriving, everything changing, and then them leaving, I think is a huge crisis that the royal family is still trying to cope with.
I think that it's quite interesting, all that, because I was, as no doubt you were, in Windsor the day they got married, and the popularity and the goodwill towards them was enormous. And I don't think it was the press. I think she succeeded in eroding that very, very quickly. And what I find unforgivable is the stress that she put on the late Queen in the last couple of years of her life.
Yeah, I think you're right. Talking to Harry and Meghan, where do you think they will be in 10 years' time? You've mimed...
I think he'll come home. I think he'll come home. And if he comes home, we must be very nice to him, because he won't particularly want to. He's quite angry, I think, and he's quite... And to me...
You think he'll come home alone?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. The King, as I mentioned before, has left the door wide open for him to do that. And, he was doing such a good job before. And as we said earlier in the programme, he looked so happy. And because usually you're happy when you're doing your duty and you're doing it for other people and you're putting things into life. If you're taking things out of life, you're not. And at the risk of, I'll probably get a lot of hate mail, but I personally think that he's petrified of losing her and looks slightly petrified of her, to be honest. But that's kind of a tricky one to say, isn't it? It's a horrible syndrome to get into.
Well, we were told last year, some people were quite close to him, that he was feeling a little bit homesick. And I do worry. It's like when they were here, they were apparently so full of ideas, waking up at 5 in the morning, coming up with all these ideas. And I am disappointed they've gone to America and after turning on the royal family of all their shows, they're just bringing out a polo show, a cookery show, and picking up awards. I don't know Harry, but I don't think that's the life that maybe he wanted.
What's terribly sad is that the late Queen gave them the whole of the Commonwealth to explore. I mean, that was going to be William and Catherine would do the home things. And the Commonwealth, to which they were both committed. I mean, she'd been doing things in the Commonwealth before she married him. It seemed like a perfect fit. And that wasn't enough for them, which is very sad. I don't know. It could have all been so wonderful, and it's turned out not to be.
I've got an idea. If as you suggest, Harry comes home alone in 10 years, he can live in Royal Lodge.
Well, yeah.